NOS4A22, Book 2, Trust No One, Chapter 6, The Dark Realm. Stuart and Cammy began flying down seemingly endless pathways of intricately designed loops around which landscapes filled beyond measure, with detailed architecture enough to captivate the most regarded talented artists the world has to offer. Whoever designed these roads were ancient and they were long gone, so the only record of who the builders were would be word-of-mouth spoken history, which comes across as speculation to historians, with gold nuggets scattered in there throughout. As Stuart and Cammy flew through the hatchway of the Gate of Time, the instantaneous force unseen, although it felt more than a mere burst of wind, sent them rushing past fantastic meteors of blazing, mysterious fury beyond the dimensions, which were meant for us to see. To them, it was as if they were caressed by the insides of living oysters on the seafloor. These were the greeters of the entrance beyond the Gate of Time. As they broke through the time-space continuum, space wasn't visible to them. Not as the ordinary eye will visualize. At least when it comes to the mind, when the mind has never encountered a significant chemical change. This particular journey was one that they had started in very much the same way as other countless times before, yet this heightened experience took them to the furthest realms of the extra-dimensional beings and their spiritual planes. It had began in the most beautiful way, which took them to most landscapes exceeding the beauty of this amazing world. No matter how vast and seemingly endless our universe truly is, there are outer layers intertwining through this rift that Cammy and Stuart traveled. Their bodies were now unseen by their new sight. Their bodies were actually becoming invisible to their sight the further they traveled through this strange inconsistency. The feeling sights and landscapes, along with unnameable geometrics, were threaded and weaved through and throughout dimensional restrictive corners and edges. Once their most intense orgasm was shared and completed, the sight and visible form of their bodies were now completely gone. Not like a ghost, but just absent. Stuart began to feel uneasy, although he could no longer speak or even communicate in the ways he had once knew. There was no panic. Instead, he tapped into the feeling of his love, Cammy, and she as well began to think and experience these incredible things together as one. Not as one flesh, but two joined spirits that had forever become one. How could there be one shared thought between them together? They were truly one love. Once the continual color of their experience had changed from soothing pink to black absolute, a small strange creature with a large head showed itself from the darkness and loomed partially covered behind the intricate design. The two had experienced much before this that was similar. This time it was different. They went too far. There was no guide to lead their way, no map, no inclination as to what the hell they were supposed to do and not do. Everyone alive since the birth of humans has always heard of the Gatekeeper, Grim Reaper, Angel of Death. This new being that was about to corrupt their minds further in order to use them for his concealed yet to be revealed grand purpose visually appeared to fit the bill. However, there in the darkness, as the large being came forward, he revealed himself not to be the Gatekeeper. This was the Timekeeper, the Keeper of Time. They called him jokingly the Angel of Time. When time was up for his stalked prey, he would show up 3 times, then vanish to another place, and once the Keeper of Time left, the Gatekeeper would show up to take over. Neither claimed souls, only to send them through the gate to their unseen master. In truth, these beings weren't angels at all. They're powerful creatures that are in control of most extra-dimensional realms. How could Cammy and Stu go through all this? How could they come back if this were true? Intransigent love for what they knew was wrong was rendered over to the darkest of the dark side, darkest of the dark sides of all of creation. Sodomy to lobotomy. The words were there in their vision when they opened or closed their eyes because the rhyming phrase was burned into their mind's eye. The phrase scorched their shared thoughts and took over. Whatever kind of good thoughts they were sharing were being attacked, and the evil rested atop the shared spiritual mind of the criminally insane couple. How did this thought invade their shared minds? They gasped within as they shared the sentiment. What came after wasn't expected. After they came together one last time, they had become unjoined, and as they were separated, their transparent ghost bodies came back. They had no clue that they were summarily summoned. Each maundering step Steward took further down the road of lunacy was in fact preordained and predestined, as the Gatekeeper and the Keeper of Time had sent the one called Lamb to the funeral home when Steward was a young child. His earliest memories were waking from a nightmare that fought to stay in his visions as they dematerialized into the darkness which they came from. Cammy had been chosen as his perfect companion, who was his counterpart, same as he was hers. She had been through things she could never say, and she never did talk about them because to her they truly were unspeakable. No matter how bad the extra-dimensional horror was for Stu, little Cammy's childhood terrors were nothing merely haunting. They were in the flesh. The stria of their spirits in motion were now and forever aligned to a lightsome alpenglow. Lamb had made himself clearer than he ever appeared to anyone ever. This was so shocking, even to their most inebriated, far beyond gone minds, or mind, that an incredible panic set in their hearts, or heart. Steward and Cammy froze in fear when Lamb materialized. He had fully materialized. This didn't happen to Aleister Crowley or any record of the world outside of the ancient Tibetan monks. Not in the way they saw him, not fully. Suddenly, there were projections behind as well as overhead. These projections were coming from Lamb. The visions in his head he had through his very own thoughts and memories were now reflecting off of the fabric of time. Time had been manipulated and bent. The strange geometrical designs were grids upon layers in a framework. Layered in a framework. This was not technology. This was the most ancient heraldic device. The birth of the invention of television and its mysterious technology came from this when Lamb inspired those pioneers. He visited them in their sleep, causing discord and comfort. This was Lamb's heyday. Imperceptible was the way Lamb operated and functioned, hidden. The only time anyone sober saw him barely ever caught a glimpse. He shifts through beyond shape or form. Death became them. Death visited anyone who was appointed for the Keeper of Time, so that their time had been proven to have come to an end, and so Steward and Cammie's love for life had been short-lived, as they now wanted to leave and die. They knew they had gone too far. The worst part about it was that they didn't appear to care on any kind of level. They were completing their mission. There was nothing else for them to do other than continue. And so the sheer spirit bodies of their ghost-like outlines waited to see where this rare journey beyond the flesh would take them. But they didn't want to know. They had to. Curiosity was not a concern. Be it I. Lamb telepathically spoke within their spirit minds directly to their deepest, most secret sins. The perceived sensation to them was that of interference. Lamb began to penetrate the core of their inner minds, infecting their heart of hearts, and paving the path to rewire their mission. At this point, all hope for a happy ending was now taken over by the evil entity supreme. The evil sickness that they had been a part of by their own means was now about to be undone. They entered the beginning of the end as Lamb continued. Now, the sights of all that are to be seen shall remain within the lens of your eye. Cammie was fighting to break free of the hold that Lamb had on her perineal and Steward's pineal gland, but the penetration could not be undone. Every which way she fought to look away, Lamb was in the direction she looked. Soon as she fought, it only made the experience painful until she relaxed, and so she was overtaken along with Steward. Before she was completely taken over in waves, she tried to speak, to at least say stop, but nothing could be said in this state of being for any human that has ever lived. Lamb now continued his speech before he would leave them forever, until their flesh would be no more. Yes, fighting brings pain. Now that there is no more fight left within you, or your shared heart and mind, you will continue to travel through the rift we are in now. And when you go, and I have left you, the grid map will be in your sight, and will never fail to guide you as a most accurate compass. You will complete your mission in 3 days. Then you shall return to me in spirit forever, beyond the flesh and earthly bodies which constrain you. Lamb was gone. His image stayed in their minds to haunt them. He dematerialized, and as one rubs their eyes from looking at the sun, the green splotches metamorphosized, spewing like a geyser and fountained from their foreheads and eyes. It was the projected energy of absolute evil, concentrated evil, that had been brewing within them both their whole lives, ready to both expel into disaster as well as catastrophic mental collapse. This strange 3 points of an energy blast had both shot out and in them at the same time simultaneously, not in one and out the other, but instead of clashing like two firemen's hose blasts pointed into each other's nozzles, the plasma energy particles gently and microscopically passed by each individual nuclei effortlessly in a dance. This was because just about any good left in them was leaving their essence and spirit soul in which they shared. The complete number of hosts and all the fury of hell would be terrified, left shaking and trembling as their loins would give way to collapse by the secret force from all the unreachable realms of dimensions that have been tucked away by the Keeper of Time. They would be if they knew. A point appeared directly in front of them. The red dot looked like a careful painter with an unseen hand touching the canvas, which was the fiber optic-like strands that seemingly expanded into infinity. The red dot did not take off like a laser as they had expected. Somehow, Kemi thought it would jolt off in a jerk like teasing a house cat with a laser pointer. Instead of any kind of logical explanation, the unexplainable red dot fused itself to the woven strands and lit them all up blood red as if it were illuminated by light. The red color that flowed throughout the strands now resembled a vascular system. At this point, now they became aware that these vein-like webs were woven through them, into them. How doomed were they? It's all personal self-perceived perception. Whichever conclusion your analysis forms to thought, then that is what you accept to have happened. Funny thing about perceived reality. Whatever we accept to be true between sight and thought is what seems real. The reality we see and the reality we feel, we believe, is all summed up in one word: acceptance. How many things we see have more components we cannot see? All of them. The question game is not a game you want to play, not in this matter. The long trip would seem like nothing. No sleep for 3 days. Maxed out on euphoria and dopamine. To Stuart and Cammy, they only accepted their existence within their trip. The trip. Yes, they were on a journey in their minds as well as their flesh bodies. This meant that they were unaware of what their flesh bodies were doing. Something like this occurrence has no comparison. 3 days became a slaughter. Lamb was the ultimate hypnotist engineer. Stewart and Cammy did such sickening, repulsive things in these last 3 days of their lives that even they themselves, in their most sane state of being they've ever experienced, would never have done the things they did before they ultimately died. Yes, it is no secret they died. The secret that no one knew was what went with them after they died. Onward they went through the gimlet-eyed spiritual descent. Things kept happening as repeat occurrences, only with slight variations. How many times did they encounter these same strange similarities? It must have been hundreds of times at least. The only difference was a big one. No matter how many minuscule details in their encounters there that were different, that actually added up to be quite the exaggerated number, the significant difference was staggering. The darkness that had now come to consume them brought the undeniable realization that there was no return to any kind of normalcy or comfort in any more kind of resemblance to anything they had once known. Petrubius, Petronius, Vitruvius were the echoes through the subsonic undertones that they did not begin to understand, other than the extremely dark and hauntingly freakish layers of spiritual dimensional layers that forced them to expand their beings as something extra different entirely. Cammy and Stu were experiencing the other side of heaven. This was the outer edges of harmonious constellation, beyond stars and planets. Yet somehow between them. How could there be these realms all around and through all this reality we once knew? This was a frightening thought that would not leave their collective mind. They had no idea that Petruvius was a frequency registering in their thoughts into a word, particularly as an old Latin word undocumented which signified their transferring of their souls to be distributed in wave soul fragments during these last 3 days of their lives. Petruvius was derived from the strange insect, or vice versa actually, only to be lost in time and quite possibly lost in the library of Alexandria. Petrobius is a genus of jumping bristletails in the family of Machillae. Many of these primitive insects are restricted to rocky shorelines. The undefiable mythos seems to creep into the unaware subconscious mind through sensitivity brought on by specific ritual chemical use. Unknowingly, Stu and Cami had precisely followed the ways of the most ancient priests of the lost tribes that predated any known historical document found anywhere on record, even in the most secret and well-guarded places of the unknown parts of the earth. Petronius was a man who was ordered by Caligula and also lived in Nero's time of murderously insane demands. He was a writer and also appointed governor of Syria who sided with the Jews in defiance of these most evil emperor's commands, yet could not escape the evil that forever would seek his own life. He had a rage about him as well as a satirical sense about him, portraying slaves as scum as well as the ones ordering him. And so Publius Petronius, even though regarded as a beautiful wordsmith, met his fate that was predestined by evil forces, the same as Cami and Stu. Marcus Vitruvius Pollio was also tied to the Romans, but not after the time of Christ, 1st century BC. He was a Roman architect, engineer, and author of the renowned treatise De Architectura on architecture, and it was a handbook for Roman architects. So these words echoed a disturbing picture that was painted before them throughout the woven fabrics of space between time and time between space. This was the key to entering the hidden extra-super reality. Petruvius Petronius Vitruvius. Petruvius signified the transferring of their spirit souls to the edges of the shores of realities in fragmented spreads throughout infinity of darkness. Petronius signified the useless fight against predetermined ordained fate. Finally, Vitruvius marked the final design of the grand scheme of Lamb, to keep the evil not only spread throughout all of creation, but more sinisterly, this meant that there would always and forever be a hint of good to be manipulated by evil dark energy. Thus, the absolute evil dark matter spawns endless creations of monstrously demonic entities. So there can never be an end to creation, as this has eternally put in place the ongoing battle that is unseen yet forever present in the spaces between all we know, whether we see it, recognize it, or not. There is more than what most realize or even suspect, influencing horrible and horrific acts and deeds. This knowledge of these manifestations cannot be taught. These are well-guarded secrets that are only shown to the chosen. Stu and Cami were predestined, chosen before birth or conception. The extra-dimensional entities knew when their time would come, as they had witnessed the plans of the Creator and knew the order of things. Everything. All of this happened before, Stewart screamed so disturbingly that Cami's spirit shifted. In reality, they previously had premonitions of this horrifying truth that has now happened. Their minds were far gone beyond what any humans in history had ever imagined to achieve before. Sadly enough, within their broken minds, they believed that it had actually already happened and had now begun to relive the horror over and over. This was beyond deja vu. How hideously sinister and truly sick. Repeat occurrences seemed to be all that they knew, although it wasn't in fact this way. Things they were experiencing truly to them seemed a certain way. Their reality was broken as their minds and sanity was beyond broken, so it was like looking into a reflection of melted silver that had first been contaminated by chemicals not solidifying but creating ripples that boil. Some bubbles popped while others stayed visible. Waves from tiny splashes made inner to outer radius tide. It started from within and from dead center only to slowly boil over until each thought was manipulated in such a precise way that was perfectly geometrical and symmetrical as well as completely unpredictable when it came to the rise and evaporation of bubbles. This now was the way of their thought processes. Perfectly calculated mind control manipulation through forces unseen by most everyone on Earth. The average thinker will never have these things cross their mind in their life. One has to experience life in a completely unusual and unconventional angle, not achieved by merely studying or researching. One must be chosen and go through the experience, although there is no sane mind that would knowingly give their life to this soul-damning madness.